New York State reporting more than 4,700 new coronavirus cases in just the past 24 hours. We have not seen numbers like that since the spring. Tonight, bars, restaurants, and gyms in the state will close at 10 p.m. And New York City now has a rapid testing site at the Staten Island Ferry Terminal. NBC News correspondent Ron Allen is there. Oh, my goodness, Ron, New York looks beautiful behind you. Staten Island has it's just a gorgeous evening. Staten Island has the highest positivity rate in all of New York City. What is going on there?
That's a good question, Allison. The numbers have been going up here. It's been declared a yellow zone. The problem is that the spread has been very generalized. It's not tied to one specific industry or factory or nursing home. And that's part of the problem of trying to stop it. Over the months that we've been dealing with all this, there's been some resistance here. This is a fairly conservative area, a Republican area that voted heavily for President Trump. So there's been some resistance. There was a local city councilor who tweeted the other day that he was going to have a big Thanksgiving gathering at his home in defiance of the suggestions, the recommendations from health officials and the governor even to have very small gatherings. So that gives you some sense of the attitude that some people have here. So the city has been surging contact tracers, surging volunteers here, handing out masks and PPE. And they set up these testing centers where people can walk in, essentially get a free test, because that sort of strategy has proved successful in other parts of the city where there has been a big cluster, where there's been an outbreak. And then there are these other measures that are being taken, essentially ending New York nightlife, closing restaurants and bars and gyms down at 10 p.m., and also trying to limit gatherings in private homes to 10 people to try and stop the spread. Allison?
Ron, tell us more about how that new testing site works. You said folks can just walk up. You don't need an appointment. Do you have to have symptoms? What are the rules? It's here at the Staten Island Ferry Terminal where people are coming and going. You take the ferry from here, Staten Island, over to Manhattan and back and forth. So that's why it's here, because there's a flow of people coming and going. And yes, it's free. You can walk up, you're screened for symptoms, you're given some basic information, and then it's a swab. And it's a rapid test, so you can get the results in about an hour or so. And if you test positive, you're asked actually to come back here, and there are contact tracers standing by to start trying to figure out where you've been and who else needs to be contacted to try and contain the spread. And that's what the city has been doing very, very aggressively during the past few months. And that's why they're targeting that particular strategy right here, where there's been a big problem. Ron, it is a very different November in New York. Usually when we have reporters at the Staten Island Ferry, it's to show the thousands and thousands of folks getting on them to go run the New York City Marathon, not lining up to get tested for COVID. It really tells you how different things are, that we had neither the marathon, and that's what's going on here. Let's talk about New York City schools. If New York City's positivity rate hits 3%, the kids will go back home and start remote learning again. Right now, we're at about 2.8%. I know you spoke to Mayor de Blasio. What did he tell you about what's going on with the schools right now?
You know, interesting, yes, the 7-day average is 2.8%, but today's average, we're told, was above 3%. Oh. So there is every expectation that if those numbers continue tomorrow and Sunday, school may not open on Monday. They're watching it literally day by day. And the mayor has said that he's told parents to be prepared for school not to open on Monday. The irony of all this is that there have been very few cases in the city's schools. New York is the largest school system in the country, one of the few that open schools for some form of in-person learning. And there are hundreds of thousands of students who've been going to school during the past couple of weeks or so. But the mayor is concerned about the fact that the spread in the city is fairly generalized. Kids go to schools from all over the place. I asked him about the irony of this, that the numbers in schools are low, but you're still closing them down. Here's what he had to say. Why close the schools? Why not be more surgical and close schools in places where the rates are high? This is going to cause a huge inconvenience for families that desperately need their kids in school.
Yeah, and Ron, I'm the guy who wanted those schools open and fought to get those schools open so long as we could do it safely, and we have. You're right. The testing shows very few people have tested positive in our schools. That's a great blessing. But when you see the rest of the city, unfortunately, experiencing this generalized problem, we've got to act out of an abundance of caution.
And so it is literally a day-by-day thing. And over the weekend, again, we're going to look at the numbers. The number today, positivity testing rate was above 3%, which is the magic number. It's a number that has been negotiated between schools, the school administration, the unions that represent teachers, city government, public health officials. They arrived at that number, and there's some questioning whether they should stick to that now because things are different from when that happened. But the bottom line is there's every indication that these schools are going to close down, and the mayor is saying hopefully it's only for a number of weeks. Put all this together, the shutting down of nightlife with the restaurants and bars closing at 10 p.m., limiting gatherings in private homes to 10 people and to 25 outdoors. And now the schools. New York is at a very critical place. You remember, this was the epicenter many months ago. No one thinks we're going to get back there. Hopefully, hopefully not. But it's a very critical time. And that's why public health officials are insisting, urging people to please do the basics: masking, sanitizing, distancing. And there's a lot of warnings going out today and have been about traveling during the holidays. Because once people start leaving New York City and interacting with family and friends in the surrounding states, or people start coming here from all over the place, that's a big worry. And so the big ask, the almost pleading from state and local officials is, please just stay home. Please limit your gatherings during Thanksgiving and during the holiday season going forward. Because, yes, there's a vaccine coming, we think and hope. It sounds like it's happening, but it's still many, many months away. Yeah. And the next few months are really critical to trying to stop this problem.
Yeah, Ron, I've just heard anecdotally from so many parents in New York who say, look, it felt like Halloween was a bit of a trigger. We're concerned about what could happen with Thanksgiving and Christmas, and they are watching and waiting to see if the schools stay open or if the mayor shuts them down. Ron Allen on Staten Island with a beautiful, beautiful New York City skyline behind him. Thank you so much. Hey, everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You're watching NBC News Now. At this hour, the U.S. shattering another COVID record, 161,000 new cases Thursday, according to our NBC News data. That's by far the highest number since the pandemic started. Hospitalizations hitting a new high, more than 67,000. That's according to the COVID Tracking Project. California now joining Texas. Both states have more than 1 million total coronavirus cases, and hospitals in the Midwest are making unthinkable decisions. Who can get immediate care and who has to wait? One doctor in Wisconsin warning the state is about to go off a cliff.
Now, the vaccine, we've had good news, but we're a long ways from a vaccine. And right now, I mean, we're heading towards the cliff. I don't know if the vaccine gets to us before we have horrible things happening here in Wisconsin.
NBC News correspondent Cal Perry's in Madison, Wisconsin. NBC News correspondent Megan Fitzgerald is at Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles. Cal, we begin with you. Wisconsin reporting more than 7,700 new cases today. That's an all-time high. The state health department now saying their outbreak is worse than what New York went through in the spring. How are the hospitals there handling that?
Well, look, they're doing their best. Some of these hospitals across the state are already at capacity. The one behind me here at the University of Wisconsin in Madison is trying to stay out of that situation by just creating new wings. They've put up 2 new wings in the hospital for coronavirus treatment just in the last 2 weeks. The positivity rate is still hovering around 36%. That is of serious concern for all of the obvious reasons. As you laid out these grim statistics, we once again wonder how this is going to be handled over the Thanksgiving holiday. Keep in mind, of course, the testing is usually on a 10 to 14-day delay before people arrive at the hospital. So those 7,700 cases that you're talking about today, we'll probably see an influx of patients coming into these hospitals in 10 days, hospitals that, as we've said, are already at capacity, Allison.
Cal, you mentioned that only 7% rather of Wisconsin's ICU beds still available. What are doctors and nurses saying to you about that? I can only imagine how concerned they must be.
Yeah, so if you can still hear me, Allison, I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. One of the things that we've been hearing from doctors sort of constantly here is their daily routine has become so difficult. It's become so hard for them to keep up. And they're, as you said, making these very, very difficult decisions. I want to play for you some sound of what we heard from both doctors and nurses. Take a listen.
We start making decisions about who gets their cancer removed versus who gets a ventilator for their COVID-19. Decisions that I never thought as a healthcare provider that I would be in the position of trying to decide who gets life-saving medical care and who doesn't get life-saving medical care. That kind of stuff isn't supposed to happen in the United States.
We've built 3 new teams to take care of COVID-positive patients. We just added another night rounder tonight to take care of the increasing volume of patients that we have.
I've had to call family members to tell them that their family is not going to make it, that I've had family and friends who have gotten sick, worrying about their unborn children because we don't know what's going on with COVID.
Allison, I find myself thinking about 6 months ago when we talked about the need to flatten the curve, to keep the pressure off of our medical institutions. We did not flatten the curve. And so what we're seeing now is an overflow, an influx of patients that does not seem to abate. And one of the issues, and you heard it there, are the impossible choices that are usually reserved in war zones or in mass casualty incidents about who to treat and who needs treatment the most, to literally triage some of these folks out, Allison.
It's really frightening. All right, let's go over to California. Megan, you're outside Dodger Stadium. It's one of the largest testing sites in the entire country. We've seen some pretty long lines there in the past few days. Do health officials feel like they are able to handle these numbers?
Allison, they do. In fact, what they've done here at Dodger Stadium is to extend the testing hours, trying to accommodate more people to come through. This site alone can do 13,000 cases a day. They can also, they're also looking at just the state, or the county rather, of Los Angeles. Just yesterday, they're telling us that they did 40,000 cases just yesterday. So they are encouraging this type of behavior, asking people to come and get tested, know if they're positive or not. So then if they are, the officials here can begin the process of doing the contact tracing. They believe that this is key, or at least one of the keys, in trying to stop the spread here in the state of California.
Megan, Governor Gavin Newsom issuing a travel advisory today, urging travelers in and out of the state to self-quarantine for 14 days. This is, of course, right ahead of Thanksgiving. How concerned are officials about a spike in cases, especially because this is an advisory, not a mandate?
Yeah, they're very concerned. And, you know, if you take a look at the numbers, they explain why officials are just so concerned. They say, look, if we continue on this trajectory, things could potentially get out of control. You look at, in just the last month, there has been a doubling in the amount of daily COVID-19 cases that they've seen in just one day. And to kind of dive a little deeper into those numbers, here in Los Angeles County, they saw in the beginning of October 950 positive cases a day on average. Fast forward to where we are now, they're looking at 2,100 confirmed cases a day. Hospitalizations up 50%. So they know, obviously, there is that correlation between people getting COVID and going to the hospital. So they are encouraging people to stay home, not, celebrate the holiday with their family, and to be safe to try and stop the spread of this virus. Allison?
All right, Megan, Cal, thank you both so much for the COVID updates there. Appreciate it. President Trump, meanwhile, touting progress on a coronavirus vaccine today, trying to take credit for Pfizer's vaccine candidate. But you might be surprised to learn that scientists had already developed a vaccine almost as soon as the virus broke out in January. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel joining me now. Richard, tell us more about that, because I think a lot of our viewers might be shocked to hear that.
So I was just listening to President Trump, and there is an encouraging story about vaccine development. And the world, scientists, many different countries are on the cusp of a breakthrough. But almost nothing that he just said appeared to be true. Nothing corresponds to what I've been reporting on and hearing from scientists and virologists for the last several months. He said that it is because of his administration, because of Operation Warp Speed, that the United States is the envy of the world and is about to develop a vaccine and end the pandemic, and that another administration would have taken years. I believe he said 3 years to do it. That doesn't make any sense, even. There are efforts underway right now in several countries that have all arrived at the same point, that have no link at all to his administration. And it didn't take them 3 years. It has taken them just under 1 year. In fact, when this virus first came out, the Chinese scientists who cracked the genetic code put the genetic code online, and almost within weeks, really, some very attentive, very smart researchers were able to come up with a prototype vaccine within weeks. Now, all the time that has passed, nearly 1 year, has been about testing. So we are on the cusp of something that is amazing. We are on the cusp of the distribution process, which is going to be very, very difficult. But it is not because of the Herculean efforts of the Trump administration and warp speed. There are many vaccines that are about to begin distribution that had nothing to do with the administration. In fact, scientists have been telling me that President Trump's statements, his recommendations about using unproven drugs and treatments, his general skepticism about the virus, his mixed messaging on masks, were more of a hindrance than they were an effort to promote public health.
Richard, you're in London. I know you've been speaking with scientists and officials in the UK. Are we seeing more international cooperation or competition when it comes to trying to get a vaccine and get one distributed as widely as possible?
It's a bit of both.
Okay.
On the cooperation front, there is soon to be, hopefully, perhaps the biggest international collaborative effort that we have seen, perhaps that we've seen since the reconstruction of Europe after the Second World War. There is about to begin a worldwide distribution program, not just distributing one vaccine, but distributing multiple vaccines produced by several different countries in order to get vaccines to primarily frontline workers, medical workers, all around the world. And the idea is that if you can get this vaccine or vaccines spread out more or less evenly to medical workers all across the globe, that you can effectively end the pandemic. You can lower it to such a degree that, yes, it is still a disease. People will still die from it, but it won't be a pandemic that cripples economies and ruins societies. So that is an incredibly collaborative effort. By the way, President Trump decided not to join this international consortium for distribution. But on the development front, the medical side, the creating a vaccine, which President Trump just claimed credit for, that has been very competitive. And there has been quite a bit of hacking and theft and misinformation in order for different laboratories in different countries to edge each other out.
All right, Richard Engel reporting for us in London on the race for the vaccine. Thank you so much. And for more on the international race for a coronavirus vaccine, you can catch On Assignment with Richard Engel. That's on MSNBC this Sunday at 10 p.m. Eastern. We need to stop the spread of COVID-19, that's no question, but can we do it without widespread lockdowns? The co-chair of President-elect Biden's COVID task force says yes.
The way we should be thinking about this is more like a series of restrictions that we dial up or down depending on how bad spread is taking place in a specific region. In New York City, for example, what you're seeing is them target their interventions down to the zip code. So we're not in a place where we're saying shut the whole country down. We got to be more targeted.
NBC News senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres joins me now. Dr. John, 48 states in the U.S. are seeing a rise in COVID cases. Do you think the targeted approach Dr. Murthy is talking about could work right now?
And Allison, I think it could work, and I think it will work right now, but it does depend on a couple of things. And number one, if you remember back in March and April, we kind of did the national shutdown, at least in most places where there were hot spots and everything shut down. And then we learned over time as we went on where coronavirus was spreading and what things we needed to target. And we said, okay, let's start looking at that. And that's what Vivek Murthy is talking about, is essentially saying, okay, instead of shutting everything down, instead of making it a binary decision where we have to look at the economy or we have to look at the virus, virus. Let's look at both together and say there's a way we can do this together. We can keep the virus under control, but keep the economy going by targeting these shutdowns. I had a conversation today with a couple of experts, and what they told me in particular is looking at schools. There's no reason schools should be shut down and then restaurants and bars not be shut down, because from a public health perspective, that doesn't make any sense. You want to shut down the areas where you know spread's coming from, the bars and restaurants, and keep some of those areas open where you know it doesn't spread very much, schools in particular, unless cases start rising rapidly in certain areas. And then if they do, then you need to shut down even more. And so I think what you're going to see is a stepwise approach working, but that stepwise approach is going to mean that we as people have to modify our behaviors and need to make sure that we're doing the things we need to do to keep everything safe. The more we do that, the less lockdowns we'll see, Allison.
Dr. John, we heard from the president this afternoon about the progress of Operation Warp Speed. He says the vaccine will be ready soon and that the rise in cases in the U.S. is because we test more than other countries. That's something he said over and over again. He also talked about survival rates. What did you make of his remarks this afternoon?
You know, he had a bunch of remarks in there, and like Richard Engel was saying, the vaccine itself, you know, talking about that and talking about how much the U.S. pushed the vaccine forward with Operation Warp Speed. I think they did help with it, but remember, this is a global race, and there are a lot of companies around the globe. So even without that, the vaccine would still be here in a fast period of time. And experts I've talked to have said, you know, we're looking the end of the year, beginning of next year, when companies start getting the emergency use authorization. There are a couple of front runners right now looking at it. The reason we need it and the reason it's good that it's coming out at that point and it looks like it's a lot more effective than we thought is because, again, those numbers are rising and we're seeing that increase over the past couple of weeks. If you look back in March and April, we had a higher death rate, especially in the elderly, isn't as high now. And what he was saying is overall the death rate is below 99.98%. That's a very, very low death rate. But if you look at it, splitting it among age groups, it's not that way for every age group. The younger ages tend not to have issues with dying from COVID-19. The older age groups, especially 65 and above, do have issues with that. So you can't unilaterally say that everybody is doing okay as far as that's concerned. But we have learned how to handle COVID-19 better. We have learned how to treat it more, and it seems to be affecting the younger more now. So that means those death rates will stay low, and we hope they do, Allison.
Dr. John, there has been a lot of talk this week here in New York about shutting down schools. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio warning parents to get ready for that possibility. It could come as soon as Monday. Now that schools have been open, do we know if they are significant COVID spreaders?
And Allison, it turns out they're not that significant of COVID spreaders, especially going by age groups. Elementary schools, hardly at all. You're hardly seeing any coronavirus coming out of elementary schools. As you get to high schools, especially the older students, you are seeing that. But a lot of that has to do with what they do after school, extracurricular activities. And that's either sports or going to parties on weekends as schoolmates. That seems to be the driving force behind this. So the experts I talked to are saying, you know, we shouldn't really look at shutting schools down at this point. Although the caveat being the next 10 days, starting Monday, between Monday and Thanksgiving, might want to think about moving your kids virtually. That way you keep them and yourself protected until the holidays get here. But overall, they're saying schools seem to be fairly safe places. One, they're keeping a lot of measures in place. And two, the children don't seem to get it or spread it as much as adults. And so that's not causing the issue. The issues are the other things in the community. And both the experts I talked to today said the same thing. If you want to make sure you're worried about the community spread of coronavirus, work on the community. Don't worry so much about the schools.
Dr. John, there is still a lot we don't know about COVID, including why some patients get so much sicker than others. But research from the Science Journal points to a possible breakthrough on that big question. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, this is very interesting because they looked at patients, around 1,000 patients, and they found these are ones who had developed pneumonia and they were sick from COVID-19. And they found out that about 10% of them had a gene that altered their antibodies. And so it made antibodies that actually attacked something called interferon. Interferon is a substance we have in our bodies that essentially is an early warning system. It alerts our immune system that it's time to get active. It's time to start fighting the virus. If it gets attacked, then the body doesn't have that early warning, and it takes a while for it to fight, and the virus can take hold. What they found out in this certain population is their genes were altered enough to where they got this antibody that, again, could attack the interferon and not let it work very well. The other thing they found out, interestingly, this affected men more than women as far as how critical they were with symptoms, how much they were in the ICU, and that those that died from it tended to be more men than women who had this gene. The other thing they found out is women who had the gene ended up more likely to have the long hauler symptoms. In other words, their coronavirus symptoms went on for months and months. And so this is one of the things we're learning about coronavirus. But the one thing I want to emphasize, this is just one thing. If you have this gene, it doesn't mean you're going to suffer from coronavirus. If you don't have this gene, it doesn't mean you're free to go about your day like you want to. So we're just learning as we go. This is one more thing we understand now that we didn't understand a while before, but not something that closes the book on coronavirus at any extent.
Dr. John, another thing we don't know a lot about, long-term effects. There's some new research from Oxford University that says nearly 1 in 5 people with COVID are also diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder within 3 months. That's pretty scary. What type of disorders are we talking about here, and do we know what's going on?
And it is pretty scary. And one thing we learned early on, especially with that lack of sense of smell or taste that we kept talking about being kind of an odd and unique symptom with coronavirus and COVID-19, is that it affects the nervous system. And people were getting encephalitis, which is a swelling of the brain. And now it looks like people are getting these longer-term mental health issues after they survive COVID-19. And some of these are very mild symptoms of a bit of delirium, possibly behavioral changes. Other can be more severe. Problem is, we don't know how long these are going to last, and that's a concerning thing right now. And that's another reason to protect yourself and everybody around you from COVID-19, because these symptoms just seem to be getting worse and seem to be going on longer and longer than we thought they would.
Dr. John, always great to catch up with you, even if some of the news is grim. Thanks a lot. Have a safe and healthy weekend.
You bet. You too.
Thank you.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.